We continue now at the top of Daf Memheim and Beis and Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 45b. On the previous summit, the Gemara brought a brisa which said that the shomrim take the place of the owner and they're responsible in the situation, let's say, of a muad. Let's say the muad kills, they're responsible to pay the kofar payment. But then the brisa made a distinction and said the shomer chinam is not responsible for the animal itself to return its value to the original owner, whereas the other shomrim are responsible. And so the Gemara now says, who is this brisa following? If it's following Rabbi Meir, who says that there would be a responsibility to pay kofar, let's say you do what's called a shmira pchusa, let's say you do an inferior kind of watching. But the problem with that is that Rabbi Meir says, the Amar socher kashomer chinam dami. Rabbi Meir also says that a socher is just like a shomer chinam. So if we're saying that the shomer chinam doesn't have to pay for the animal because a shmira pchusa is sufficient, for a socher also that should be sufficient. So listening chutz mi shomer chinam veha socher. So what the brisa should have said was there's an exception by not only shomer chinam, but socher as well. If a shmira pchusa is done, that's going to be sufficient. V'ikar Rabbi Yehuda, and if the brisa is following Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar socher cannot say socher dami, who says that a socher is the same as a shomer socher, so then it would make sense why a socher is responsible for the animal. But then nisni chutz mi shomer chinam, then what it should have said is, with the exception of a shomer chinam who's not responsible for the animal because a shmir pchus is enough for a shomer chinam. However, the kulan b'muad and piturin linyan kofar. But it should have said that everybody agrees by a muad it's pater in terms of kofar by all of these shomrim, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, shmir pchusa is enough in terms of watching the animal, in terms of a muad, in terms of watching the animal by kofar. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Huna bar Chinna, so Rav Huna bar Chinna says, he answers, Hamani Rebbe Lazar. This Mishnah actually follows the opinion of Rebbe Lazar. The Amar Ein Lo Shmira Elasakin. Rebbe Lazar holds that there's no real good protection except for with a knife, meaning to kill the animal. The animal, when it's a muad, is considered to be totally dangerous, and therefore, Linyan Socher, Savarla, Reb Yehuda, Damar Socher, Kenose Socher Dami. As far as a Socher, as far as a renter is concerned, he holds like Reb Yehuda that a Socher is a Nose Socher, and so therefore, the Shmira that is done, it is going to be sufficient in terms of a shomer chinam, won't have to pay for the actual animal. The other shomerim will have to pay for the animal, and in terms of the payment of kofar, that will have to be paid as well. And Rashi explains, Damar socher kashomer chinam dami. Again, Rabbi Meir holds that a socher is like a shomer chinam, Babba metzia b'hashol v'nisni chutz mi shomer chinam v'hasocher. If that's the case, a shmir pechusa should be enough not only for a shomer chinam but also for a socher. Even the socher should be pater in terms of returning the value of the animal to the original owner. V'ikar Rabbi Yehuda, and if we're following Rabbi Yehuda, heicha de shamro shmira pechusa, and if all that was done was a shmira pechusa, amay mishalmim kofar. But why are we paying kofar in that case? Amar Rabbi Yehuda muad sagi le b'shmira pechusa. Rabbi Yehuda said that a muad it's enough for a shmira and there should be no kofar payment. And so finally the Gemara said the Bryce is Rabbi Eliezer. The Bryce is Rabbi Eliezer who holds b'mas nisan. He says in the Mishnah, Ein lo shmira lemuad elasakin, that there's no real shmira for a muad except the knife. V'afilu shmira mu'ula, even really a shmira mu'ula is not enough. V'kol shekein hai the shmira pechusa natre. For sure, in this case where the person only did a shmira pechusa, as we said, that's not going to be enough. When we shemachim mishalman kofar, all of that is to explain why these shomrim have to pay kofar. That's why they pay kofar, because the shmira pechusa is certainly not enough. Ulinyan demei hashor. Now, in terms of paying for the shore, nami chayav, and they're going to be chayav the alein l'shomro shmira mu'ula, because all shomrim are going to need to watch at least a shmira mu'ula, except for the shomer chinam hoel v'nosei sacher, since they're all considered at the level at least of nosei sacher. Uvidenatre shmira mu'ula lo matzi mukim la afilu Rebbe Eliezer. Now, you can't say that the Bryce is talking where the shmira mu'ula was actually done. The avagav dilian kofar chayavin the lo sagi le b'shmira mu'ula. Even though Rebbe Eliezer holds that as far as kofar shmira mu'ula is not enough and they have to pay kofar, but linyan demei shor lebailim paturim, but it is certainly enough in terms of paying back the value of the shore to the owners. Tahan not true, because they watched it. Umay havalu lemevad. What more should they have done? And the Gemara continues, Abaya says, Liolam Rabbi Meir. Really, this brisa does follow Rabbi Meir, and the question was if it follows Rabbi Meir, so a socher also shouldn't be enough to do a shmira pechusa. But the Gemara says, Uchidamachlif Rabba bar Avu. It's like Rabba bar Avu actually reversed the opinions of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Vetani socher ketzad meshalim, and it says, according to him, how does a socher pay? Rabbi Meir omer kashomer socher. Rabbi Meir actually says a socher is not like a shomer chinam, but a shomer socher. Rabbi Yehuda omer kashomer chinam, and Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says a socher is like a shomer chinam. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rebbe Lazar says, Masar shoro l'shomer chinam, if a person gives over his shore to a shomer chinam, hizik chayiv. So if the shore does damage, that shomer chinam is chayiv. Huzak pater, but if the animal gets damaged, the shomer chinam is pater. Amrin, so they said as follows, how do we understand this? Hey chidami, what exactly is the case? If he took upon himself to watch out for the damage that is done, afilu huzak nami l'chayiv, so then even if it was damaged damaged itself, he should be chayiv. And if he did not accept any damages that the animal does, afilu hizik namili potter. So then, even in a situation of hizik where it does damage, so the shomer should be potter. Why are we making a distinction and saying hizik is chayiv and huzak is potter? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rava, Rava says, Liolam shekibel olav shmiras nezakav. The case is the shomer chinam accepted upon himself any damage that this animal does. But here the case is as follows. Kagon shehikir bo shehun nagchan. The case is it was clear that this animal gores. Ustama de milsa de lo azal iu mazik achrini kabbalah. So therefore we assume that the person took upon himself that it shouldn't go and damage others, that he accepted upon himself. But the azi achrini umazki leilidei, that others should come along and damage the animal, lo asak adaite, that the shomer doesn't consider. Meaning to say, when we're talking about huzak over here, we're talking about this animal that the shomer is watching, it gets damaged from another animal. And when it gets damaged from another animal, so that the shomer chinam did not have to think about, he's not responsible for that. That's why we say huzak potter. But if it's hizik, if the animal goes and damages others, that's certainly the shomer chinam did think about, and that's why he is responsible. And Rashi says, Ustama de milsa shor nachon, when we have a shore that generally gores, kimekabel inish nitiruse ole, when a person says, I'm going to watch this animal, lamashu muchzak mekabel ole, he's thinking about what the animal generally does. It shouldn't damage others. But that others shouldn't damage this shore, he's not thinking of that. Because there is no shore that's standing opposite this shore, because on the contrary, the other shore is afraid this is a shore that gores, and therefore, again, that's why he's responsible for any damage that the shore does, but he's not responsible if the shore is injured by another shore. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Kesharo bailov b'moseira v'noal b'fanav karoi. Let's say the owner, he tied up the animal by its reins, he closed the fence properly, v'yotzav hizik, and then the animal goes out and does damage anyway. Echad tam v'echad muad chayev. Whether we're talking about a tam or a muad, the person, the owner, is going to be chayev. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says tam chayev. If the animal is a tam, so then he's chayev. That's not considered to be a proper watching, a guarding of the animal. Umuad potter, but when it comes to a muad, potter. Shenamar, like it says, v'lo yishmerenu ba'olav, it says that the owner didn't watch it. V'shamar who said this is considered to be an appropriate level of watching. Rabbi Eliezer says, Ein lo shmira el sakin. There is no proper way of watching it except for with a sakin, with a knife. When you have a muad, there really is nothing you can do that you can say you watched it properly. And Rashi explains, v'nal b'fanav karoi hainu shmira pchusa. The case over here is essentially, it's an inferior kind of watching. Delas sheyachol alamud baruch mitzuya, just a door that can withstand normal winds, lekaman ba'hakones, later on in hakones. And so again, according to Rabbi Meir, you do a shmira pchusa, that's not enough in terms of damages that the shore does, and you are responsible for those damages. V'lo yishmerenu ba'olav, but then the pasuk says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, v'lo yishmerenu ba'olav, as long as you do a shmira pchusa, that's enough by a muad. B'muad ksiv miyed hakasav l'shmira muetas kidim afarish b'gemara. The Gemara will explain, a shmira muetas is enough. And Rabbi Eliezer says, ein lo shmira l'muad elosakin. There is no shmira for a muad except with the knife. V'afilu shamro shmira mu'ula v'hipel hakosel v'yotza chayiv. Even if he does a superior kind of watching and it causes the wall to fall down and it does damage, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the owner is going to be chayiv. V'sholosh machlokas b'davar, and there's a three-way machlokas here. Rabbi Meir b'shmira pchusa chayiv u'v'mu'ula potter. According to Rabbi Meir, shmira pchusa is not enough. The owner is chayiv by a shmira mu'ula, it's potter. Rabbi Yehuda b'pchusa nami potter. According to Rabbi Yehuda, shmira pchusa also is going to be potter. That is going to be enough. Rabbi Eliezer b'mu'ula nami l'chayiv. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, even a shmira mu'ula is not going to be enough when it comes to a muad. And the Gemara says, my time with Rabbi Meir, what's the reason of Rabbi Meir? Why is it that Rabbi Meir says that you're always chayiv, shmira pchusa is not enough? Because he holds stam shvorim lam becheskas shimor kaimi, that most oxen are not considered to be becheskas shimor, they're not considered to be watched over. V'yamar achmona tam nechayiv, and then the Torah says that a tam, the person is chayiv. Deniboy le shmira pchusa means to say that we require a shmira pchusa. Hadar amar achmona v'lo yishmerenu gabe muad, and then it says v'lo yishmerenu by a muad deniboy le shmira mu'ula. That's essentially saying that there's a requirement of shmira mu'ula, and shmira pchusa is not enough. V'yolef negicha l'tam negicha l'muad, and then he learns out the goring by tam is compared to the goring by muad. By all of these, according to Rabbi Meir, the requirement is that you need a shmira mu'ula. Rabbi Yehuda savar, but Rabbi Yehuda, on the contrary, he holds stam shvorim becheskas shimor kaimi, that most shvorim oxen are considered like they're being watched. Amar achmona tam neshalim, and then the pasuk says the tam pays. Deniboy le Shmira Me'ula, saying that's not enough. You actually need a superior kind of watching. Hadar Amar Achmana V'lo Yishmerenu Gabi Muad. Then it says V'lo Yishmerenu by Muad, to Navid Le Shmira Me'ula, again to do a Shmira Me'ula, but have a Riboy Achariva. But that's actually what we call an inclusion following another inclusion. Ve'ein Riboy Achariboy El Lamayit. And when you have a Riboy Achariboy, if you have a double inclusion, it actually is an exclusion. Mi'ed HaKasav L'Shmira Me'ula. And therefore, what the pasuk is essentially doing is it's excluding Shmira Me'ula. It's saying by a Muad, a Shmira Pechusa is enough. V'chitema Negicha L'tam, Negicha L'Muad. And if you're going to try to make this comparison, that it says Negicha by Tam, Negicha by Muad, they should be the same. Hami'et Rachmana V'lo Yishmerenu. That's what the pasuk is excluding and saying V'lo Yishmerenu Lazev V'lo La'acher. That applies to the Muad. It doesn't apply to the Tam. That's why Rav Yehuda says by a Muad, a Shmira Pechusa is enough, but not by a Tam. And Rashi explains La B'cheskas Shimur Kaimi. Again, according to Rabbi Meir, most oxen are not presumed to be being watched. People generally don't watch their oxen at all. They just allow it to go. And therefore, when the pasuk comes along and says to watch it again, it means to say a shmira pchusa, negicha l'tam, negicha l'muad. And then again, we have another pasuk, v'lo yishmerenu, that's shmira me'ula. And we compare the two that we always say that you require a shmira me'ula. Shmira pchusa is not enough. According to Rabbi Meir, migzera shava deliboy nami tam, shmira me'ula. The gzera shava tells us that the tam also requires shmira me'ula. Both of them require the shmira me'ula. Stam shvarim b'cheska shimur kaimi. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Most shvarim are presumed to be watched. Ein l'cha adam sheino meshamer shoro shmira pechusa. Nobody doesn't watch a little. V'chayev akasav b'tam. And then the pasuk is saying tam is chayev al mashmira me'ula boy. That shows you need a shmira me'ula hadar kasav. And then there's another inclusion, like we said. The double inclusion is an exclusion. V'chitema neilef negicha the tam nami l'sagi liski lei b'pechusa. Maybe again you'll do this gzei rashav and say a tam it's enough with a shmira pechusa. So that we say no, that's not the case. It's only true when it comes to a muad. But the Gemara continues, but how could you say that V'lo Yishmerenu is an exclusion and saying it only applies to a muad and not by a tam, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that by a tam a shmira me'ula is needed, but isn't that needed for the lav? Rashi explains, V'lo Yishmerenu miboyle lelav kilomar legufe, meaning it's needed for the context of the pasuk itself, Dimlo shamru shmira me'ula l'chayev, that if you don't do the shmira me'ula, the person is chayev. V'darshinan bei riboy achar riboy, and then of course we do the double inclusion, umiyuta de tam minali. But the point is, where do we know to exclude this halacha that it does not apply by a tam? And the Gemara says no, because imkei nechtov rachmana v'lo yishmor. If that was the case, it could have said v'lo yishmor. My v'lo yishmerenu. Why does it use the language of v'lo yishmerenu? That means lazem means we're talking just about this animal. V'lo la'acher, don't apply that to a tam, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda makes a distinction between a tam and a muad. And the Gemara continues, Tanya, we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Echad tam yechad muad, whether we're talking about a tam or a muad, sheshamro shmira pchusa pater. If a shmira pchusa was done, the person is pater, that is sufficient. And the Gemara says, my time, and what is the reason? What's the reasoning of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov? Savar like Rabbi Yehuda, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, Da'amar muad, b'shmira pchusa sagile, who says that by a muad it actually is enough to do a shmira pchusa. V'yolif negicha l'tam and negicha l'muad, and he does make the gzera shava between tam and muad, and says therefore that by tam as well, shmira pechusa is enough. And the Gemara continues, Amar Ravada Barava says, Lo pater Rabbi Yehuda el tzad hado shebo. When Rabbi Yehuda says that by a muad a shmira pechusa is enough, that means the side of the animal, so to speak, the half of the animal, that's a muad. Avol tzad tamas b'makom omedis, but the side, the first half of the payment, so to speak, which is the tzad tamas, the side of the animal, the portion of the animal that's a tam, that stays in the same place, and that still requires a shmira me'ula. The patur only applies to that second half. And Rashi says, "Aval tzad tamas b'makom omedis the lo sagi le b'pchusa." It's not going to be enough a shmira pchusa u'mashalem chatzi nezek. The person still would have to pay chatzi nezek. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav says, Muad l'karen yamin, just because an animal is a muad for its right horn, no muad l'karen small, doesn't necessarily mean that it is a muad for its left horn. And the Gemara says, Amri, who is this going according to? They say as follows, Aliba deman, who is this following? Aliba de Rabbi Meir, for following Rabbi Meir, Hamar echad tam yechad muad shmira mu'ula boy, but Rabbi Meir anyway says the same kind of shmira is needed. By both a tam and a muad, they need shmira mu'ula. And Aliba de Rabbi Yehuda, for following Rabbi Yehuda, who makes a distinction in the kinds of shmira tam needs from a muad, Ma'ir your Karen small. What do you have to talk about the left horn? Afilu biyamin, even within the right horn. Nami, also there's a distinction. Ispeit tzad tamus, v'ispeit tzad muedis. There's a side, a portion that's a tam, a portion that's a muad. So one portion, the tam portion, does need a higher shmira. Now Rashi explains, Ali b'daman, according to whom? What kind of question is this? Maybe we just mean to say that if it's a muad on the right side to pay full, it's not a muad on the left, and it's going to pay half on the left. What are we talking about? The kind of shmira that's needed. Kilomar havadei linyan tashlumin lo itzrichle. So Rashi says, what the Gemara means is, in terms of payment, we don't need to say this. That's obvious that you can have a muad for the right side, but not for the left side. Lo itzrichle la Rav lashmin, and Rav doesn't need to teach that. To liyamin nezek shalim v'lasmol shalu huad la mishalim chatzi nezek, that the right side pays nezek shalim, the left side, which is a tam, pays chatzi nezek. That's obvious. To akiyai gavna tuva, we've seen many cases like that. Tanan in the Mishnah, dafilu muad la'adam, einu muad lebehema. We say if it's a muad for man, it's not a muad for animal. V'kol shekein muad lekeren yamin shu tzad chazaka shabo. Certainly if it's a muad for the right side, which is the stronger side of the animal, einu muad l'small is not necessarily a muad for the left side. Elavadei Rav le'inyan shmira ashminan. So really, if it's obvious that Rav is saying in terms of watching the animal, you might need a different level of watching for one horn than the other. V'yalibad Rabbi Meir hatamim muad l'inyan shmira ke'adadininu. And if you're following Rabbi Meir, tam and muad have the same level of shmira anyway. That's what the Gemara is asking here. It doesn't really seem to matter whether we're going according to Meir or Rabbi Yehuda. We don't really understand what Rav is trying to teach. And so the Gemara says, Amri, they say as follows, they answer, Liolam Rabbi Yehuda. Really, it is following Rabbi Yehuda. So the question is, if it's within Rabbi Yehuda, he makes a distinction even within one horn, because there's a tzad tamas and a tzad muad. Why do you have to say that he's making a distinction between the right horn and the left horn? But the Gemara says simply, Velo Svirale, Ravada Barava. He doesn't hold of Ravada Barava, that tzad tamas b'makomo medis, so he doesn't make that distinction within one horn, and that's why he's making a distinction between the Keren Yamin and the Keren Smol. V'achi Kamar, and it's saying as follows, Ki hai gavnahu to mashkachas beit tzad tamas umuedis. But in this scenario, meaning there is a scenario where within one animal you can have a tzad tamas and a tzad muad. Let's say the right horn is going to be considered a muad, and the left horn is going to be considered a tam, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Vav Amud Aleph.